My name is Renee Schaller. I've been an adjunct professor at Hunter for about 10 years. I'm also alumna. I had studied here. I have a creative nonfiction MFA, Master of Fine Arts, and I've taught with the English department and specifically writing courses. So in the fall, I teach the first year composition course, where we really focus on academic research and writing a research paper. And for many students, this is their first experience with extended research, with an extended research process, and also with writing a long paper. Many of my students, I would say probably 60 to 70% per class, haven't written a paper that's over 3 or 4 pages. So this is their first time they write a 10-page paper, and that is scaffolded. So we do that in steps over the semester. And going through, I build in a lot of group work doing that. My other role here, I also teach creative writing courses. So in the spring, I completely change hats and I teach Introduction to Creative Writing. And then I also teach a memoir writing workshop for creative writing majors. So I began with all of that because I think a big part of like why I do and how I do self and peer review is informed by coming out of a creative background where our primary mode of instruction was the writing workshop. So it was always, put your work out, 12 people are going to read it, and then they're going to come to class and they're going to critique it. And it was one of the most, for me, painful and stressful parts of my education because opinions are so subjective and you hear so much nonsense that it becomes really hard to like filter out what is actually helpful and what isn't. So in approaching peer review, that's one of the groans that I've definitely tried to take out of it, is how can I make a peer review a thing that actually reduces stress for students rather than add stress. We know research says that deep learning, right? If you're working on a semester-long project, which my students always do in the writing classes that I teach, if you're working on a long project and you're engaged in deep learning, that will be a stressful process at some point. At some point, you're going to be in the middle of that where you have to cycle back through and recognize that you thought you had some answers, you don't have answers, you have to go back out. And that feels messy and uncomfortable. And especially for students experiencing that for the first time, it can be something that they really work hard to avoid. I feel like that is the setup for what I want to share with you. So I'm going to go ahead and do a screen share so I can show you some things. So I think this is like maybe cutting off some of it, but these are the main reasons I use peer review. And a lot of these are really probably obvious and you probably know all these things and have talked about them already. But when I do low stakes peer review assignments, it allows me to look at my rubrics and or my learning objectives, break them down and teach them week by week so that within each workshop or within each peer review day, I can give them a focused set of questions to consider and they can respond to those and we can work on those in isolation before continuing on to the next step. The main reason is that we know from research and also probably tons of anecdotal evidence, I know on my part, that students often confuse revision with editing. Sometimes I think that's intentional, as I was saying before. I mean, as a human, I don't want to be in a messy, insecure place where I'm still trying to find out the answer to something. I want to be given a question that I can then write some bullet points to, hand it in, get my grade, and everything is good. In all of my classes, 120, this comes down from the department. They have to write their own research question. So they have to get to that messy place on their own and engage in the research process. And in my writing workshops, I encourage them to use writing as a tool for discovery. So they also need to get to that place where they do some writing and then consider, what am I really trying to get to here? So at a certain point, students have a draft, but it needs to go to the next stage. And they need those questions like, they need, sorry, I lost my train of thought. Okay. So they need to move beyond thinking of just fixing sentence level errors, right? And they also need to move beyond, I found that a lot of times they wait for the teacher to tell them what she doesn't like, which is a really big issue, because as I'm trying to teach them, like, I probably have like 8 learning outcomes or objectives that I'm trying to get through by the end of the semester. And I'm trying to get through them all. I can't read 8 drafts. So it becomes essential that, and also I don't want them obviously to finish my class and leave and still need a teacher to tell them what they need to fix. Like, that's the bigger thing. But I can't even just like do it all hands on and teach them one-on-one. So I use usually weekly or bi-weekly writing workshops in small groups, either pairs, which I've been leaning toward a lot more lately, or groups of 3 or 4. And it always comes with very specific questions for them to focus on, and more questions than I think I should ask them, because some students will just like tear through the list really quickly without going so deeply. And I'll get to that later. The final thing I just want to say about why I use peer review is they do have these misconceptions about what revision entails, but they also have a deep desire to learn how to generate and draft and deepen and shape their arguments and their research and their creative writing. They really want to learn how to do this. So if you can package it in whatever way it would be in your class, like you're like, this is, we're doing the work of biology here, and this is the first part of it, or, you know, we're doing the work of memoir here, and this is the first part of it. And then we're going to go on and we're going to learn this. It really helps them, because it connects with like their anxieties about, but I don't know how to order this yet, or I don't know how to start this research paper yet. And if you're able to say like, that's something we're going to worry about in 4 weeks when we get to that part, this part, we only worry about this. It really does reduce their anxiety, but it also just teaches them the process that many writers, like based on research, that many writers follow. I also use a lot of self-reflection in my classroom. So whenever I do a peer review workshop, I always at the end ask them to do a process journal. And I ask them to write about what was, before they do their workshop, I ask them what was difficult or challenging lately. So they have something to go into the workshop with, in addition to the questions that I give them. But at the end of the workshop, I always, and this is not on the slide, I apologize, I always ask them to, what is the next thing you need to do? And they are prompted by the list of like questions that I give them. Like they come in like, you know, descending order of importance. So like, if they are still working on 1 and 2, they can look at 3 and know what the next part of the puzzle is that they need to keep working on. And then we always end class by everyone either posting something to Blackboard so that we all see what everyone is doing, or if the class is small enough, everyone shares, like, this is my next step. This is what I'm doing next. And I think that's really important, because a big part of revision is just like not going to the page cold and always being able to like have that working list for yourself. Like that's a really important skill to be able to practice. I also use self-reflection in midterm and final portfolio reflections. And that's just a way of getting them to articulate like what changes did you make and why did you make them? And I ask questions that guide them to contextualize their choices within the work that we have done together, just to reinforce either the lessons we've learned or the tools that I want them to learn from the workshops that they do, etc. Okay, I'm going backwards. So this is an assignment that I adapted from a 120 assignment that came down from the department. And this is an example of a way that I used, I would say it's kind of like self-reflection as a way to get them to engage with the revision process at another level or deeper level. All 120 students have at the beginning of the semester a common reading. So this past fall, they all read a chapter from a book about white language supremacy. So all first year comp students read that chapter. And they all have to write a diagnostic essay where they, it's like a 3-paragraph response. And then at the end of the semester, instead of a final exam, they rewrite that response, and they also write a reflection about what they changed and why, based on what they've learned in class. So I have that assignment here. This is from, sorry, I'm trying to figure out how to open it. This is from Wendy Hayden. She wrote this assignment, but I think one thing I just wanted to point out is I love that she includes this quote about why reflection is so important. Students become independent learners if they can take what they learn about writing into the future beyond a particular class, rather than remaining dependent on teachers or peer evaluators. And so what this assignment asks them to do is rewrite what they wrote, but apply, either put it in conversation with other readings from the course, or apply what they learned in another class to their revision, or discuss the article in light of recent events. So this is a beautiful assignment, and I adore this assignment, and I wish I thought of it myself, but I've been teaching it for a few years, and there is a problem, which is that this is the last thing they do. They've just slogged through their first big paper that they've written, scaffolded in all of these steps over, the last 3 months. So they've probably written a total of like 40 to 50 pages, right, between all of their drafts and things like that. And they're exhausted. And when they get to this, the revisions that they do have been historically so superficial that I would just say to myself, like, what am I doing wrong? And I started to think about it. And the more I thought about it, I was like, I can do 2 things better. One is obviously include a rubric that explains what I really want to see. But even with that, I was still getting like things that were really superficial, and they were just doing let me add some words, let me take some commas, let me take away some sentences, that kind of superficial stuff. So after I was in a summer, like ACERT program during the COVID summer. And Jeff Allred was very excited about using Hypothesis, which is a digital annotation tool. And we were encouraged or forced, I don't know, to adapt a new technology that we could use in our classroom. And the more I thought about it, the more I was like, I hate to use this word, but I would love to force or encourage my students to go back to that original reading and actually do some of these things on the reading instead of just engage, like just going, because what I felt like they were doing is just going back to their assignment instead of going back to the actual reading and rereading and thinking anew and making these connections and then rewriting. This is the assignment that I created with Hypothesis to try to ameliorate some of those issues that I was talking about. And so I requested that these are the things that the writing assignment asked them to do. I asked them to do that on the actual reading, on the text. Basically what they did was they went through, and I was so impressed by their ability to all of a sudden make connections with the research they had done all semester and this new reading that, or not new reading, excuse me, the old reading, the first reading they had done. And they had never done this before. Sometimes they might connect it to like something that was happening in the news, but here I was getting specific mentions to text from their research. And I was just really, really happy with the results and the depth of their engagements. This is from ACERT, but it's a guide to hypothesis resources. So that way, if you want to make a digital annotation assignment, it's available here. And I think it's available on ACERT pages too, but I found this really helpful because when I was setting mine up, I kind of just had to do it all, like figure it out, you know, for myself. I've also used the Hypothesis as a way to do peer review because I've found Google Docs or stuff, they'll wind up again with that same sentence level editing instead of digging deeper. So I found that in giving them a list of questions to focus on and then working in the hypothesis where they can't make those kinds of edits, they can only highlight and then annotate on the side. So they're forced to kind of think more deeply, answer these questions. That's how I've used this tool to really help me bump up my game with peer and self-review. And it's really helped take off some of the pain too for my students in terms of just learning these processes.